Kalorama, a recorded book's Hybrid imprint, presents The Myth of Left and Right, How the Political Spectrum Misleads and Harms America, by Hyrum Lewis and Verlan Lewis. Read by Hyrum Lewis. Introduction. American politics is at a breaking point. This became obvious when a mob of American citizens, upset with the results of the 2020 presidential election, stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. to stop Congress from tabulating the election results. In order to work, democracies require citizens who respect the rights of individuals, defer to the outcomes of elections, and abide by the rule of law. But today's toxic political culture has caused many Americans to abandon these vital norms. Ideological tribalism and partisan hatred have become so rampant that frightening numbers of American citizens countenance violence against their political opponents to get their way. How did we get to this point? The standard explanations, media echo chambers, party polarization, racism, status anxiety, internet misinformation, demographic sorting, fear, and social homophily, tell only part of the story. An important but overlooked contributor to American political dysfunction today is a widespread misunderstanding of ideology. Ideology dominates American politics, and since we are thinking about ideology all wrong, we are thinking about politics all wrong. Concepts have consequences, and when a society adopts an incorrect political model, the results can be devastating. The standard view of ideology says that politics is largely a clash between two worldviews that can be modeled on a political spectrum. The left-wing worldview, we are told, is expressed in a preference for greater government control of the economy, social permissiveness, and foreign policy dovishness, while the right-wing worldview is expressed in a preference for free markets, social restriction, and foreign policy hawkishness. Taking these worldviews to extremes leads to totalitarianism, fascism at the far right, or communism on the far left, while the more respectable positions exist at the center left, liberalism or progressivism, and center right, conservatism. This model of politics frames our thinking, shapes our language, and sets the terms of public debate. It creates a sense of personal identity for millions of Americans, is taught in classrooms across the country, and is used in nearly every political discussion, whether on social media, in the halls of Congress, on cable news, or around the dinner table. It is, without question, the most influential political paradigm of 21st century America. It is also completely wrong. The political spectrum does not tell us where someone stands in relation to a fundamental worldview or philosophy, or disposition, temperament, belief, value, or any other essence. It only indicates a commitment to a tribe. As long as binary coalitions characterize our politics, the political spectrum can be useful for modeling commitment to those coalitions and what they stand for at a specific place and time, but it becomes misleading as soon as we assume that it is modeling a commitment to an underlying essence. In the following chapters, we will show how a mistaken understanding of ideological categories causes confusion and threatens to dissolve the bonds of affection that should unite us as citizens. We challenge the static, essentialist conception of ideology that currently dominates public and academic discourse alike, and instead propose a social conception in which the political spectrum and the ideological terms associated with it, left, right, liberal, progressive, conservative, and reactionary, are socially constructed, historically contingent, context-dependent, and constantly in flux. Although America has two dominant ideological tribes, there is no essence uniting all of the positions of each side. Our two political teams have coalesced around the concepts of left and right, but the concepts themselves are fictions. While most people acknowledge that politics has become increasingly tribal, they generally assume that there must be some bedrock philosophy or value that each tribe rallies around. There is not. Terms are useful inasmuch as they are predictive, and it turns out that ideological terms are only predictive across contexts in describing who people support, tribe, but not what they support, a philosophy. The single biggest fallacy in politics today is that the political spectrum refers to divergent worldviews, when in reality it refers only to divergent tribes. Clearly, there are many issues in politics, and yet we model politics using a unidimensional spectrum as if there were just one. Why? The answer for most people is that there is something that unites them. That something is the essence. For example, the anti-abortion, low-tax, and pro-Iraq war positions are all connected by a philosophy or disposition we call conservative, and so we place conservatives on the center-right of a political spectrum. Our task in this book is to demonstrate that such an essential unity does not exist, and that the various dimensions of politics don't have an intrinsic connection. Why do we refer to both Milton Friedman, a Jewish pro-capitalist pacifist, and Adolf Hitler, an anti-Semitic, anti-capitalist militarist, as right-wing, when they had opposite policy views on every point? We shouldn't. Placing both Hitler and Friedman on the same side of a spectrum as if they shared some fundamental essence is both misleading and destructive. It shuts down productive discourse and stokes irrational prejudices. Our thesis is simply this: left-right ideologies are bundles of unrelated political positions connected by nothing other than a group. A conservative or liberal is not someone who has a conservative or liberal philosophy, but someone who belongs to the conservative or liberal tribe. This means that ideologies do not define tribes, tribes define ideologies. Ideology is not about what, worldviews, it is about who, groups. There is no liberalism or conservatism, only liberals and conservatives. And the political spectrum does not model an essential value, but only tribes and what they stand for at a specific time and place. Ultimately, we are saying that nearly all of the incessant talk about liberal, conservative, progressive, left-wing, and right-wing is a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. We understand that this is a bold claim. It challenges a century of conventional wisdom and goes against the prevailing consensus of elite opinion in the United States. Virtually all Republican politicians say that they agree with their party's platform because they are conservatives who share their party's conservative philosophy, while virtually all Democratic politicians say they agree with their party's platform because they are liberals, or progressives, who share their party's liberal or progressive philosophy. Almost all of our academic colleagues say that they agree with the left on a wide array of issues: abortion, wealth redistribution, affirmative action, military intervention, environmentalism, etc., because left-wing positions promote their single value of social justice. Avid Fox News watchers say they agree with what Sean Hannity says because both they and Hannity are on the right. Nearly every politician, partisan voter, pundit, journalist, or public intellectual believes that they agree with the many issues associated with their side of the political spectrum because they agree with the underlying philosophy of that side. They all believe politics is about one big thing, an essence, that defines and divides left and right. In the following chapters, we will show that this is a society-wide delusion. The popularity of the essentialist view of ideology makes it no less mistaken. A false idea is false, regardless of how many people believe in it. Most educated 18th century Americans accepted the four humors theory of disease, and most educated 21st century Americans accept an essentialist view of the political spectrum. But both are equally erroneous. Societies can be misled into holding collective delusions, so it is necessary for people of common sense to point out the obvious and declare that the emperor has no clothes. As George Orwell put it, we have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men. By stating the obvious fact that there is more than one issue in politics, we are simply doing our intellectual duty, and as radical as our thesis might seem, it is nonetheless where the evidence leads. With the myth of left and right so widespread in American culture, is the solution simply a matter of educating the mass public in a reality that intellectual elites have long understood? Unfortunately, no. As we will show in the chapters that follow, the left-right framework was actually imported into America by academics and journalists, and it is intellectuals that are largely responsible for spreading the myth of left and right in our popular culture over the past century. As a result, most scholars in the academy today are more blinded by the myth than those outside the ivory tower. For example, while most historical scholarship today is premised on the assumption that race, class, and gender are social constructs, historians who have written about ideology nonetheless assume that left and right are transhistorical essences that remain fixed across time and place. Thus, they invoke left and right in ways that speak of individuals, political groups, and the country moving to the left or moving to the right on a spectrum. This approach is also widespread in political science, where an entire literature has emerged around the analytical concept of polarization. The idea that in recent decades Democrats have moved to the left and Republicans have moved even further to the right. Thousands of academic books and articles have advanced this claim. It is, as political scientists Michael Barber and Nolan McCarty note, a broad scholarly consensus. What very few scholars stop to ask is what sense it can make to speak of individuals and groups moving to the left or to the right over time, when the very meanings of left and right change during that same time period. Some scholars of American political development working at the intersection of political science and history have recently recognized the evolutionary character of ideologies and resisted the myth of left-right polarization. But these scholars are in the minority. This book is an attempt to give a more accurate conception of ideology in America and thereby correct common misunderstandings of ideology among the general public and among the intellectuals who promote these confusions. This rethinking of ideology is needed today for the same reason that a rethinking of medicine was needed in the 19th century. Operating under a false four humors understanding of health, many doctors bled their patients to death in earlier centuries, and operating under a false essentialist understanding of ideology, political actors are bleeding our republic to death today. It is time to move beyond this flawed model of politics and let our public discourse begin to heal. 1. The myth of left and right. The myth of left and right is the false belief that there is an essence behind the political spectrum. While it is undeniable that many Americans hold their political views in packages that we call ideologies, those who support abortion rights, for instance, are also more likely to support income tax increases and affirmative action. The question is, why? Why is there a noticeable correlation between these seemingly unrelated issues, and why do we find them clustering in patterns that are predictable and binary instead of random and pluralistic? In this chapter, we present and evaluate two competing explanatory theories that we will use as the analytical framework for the rest of this book. The two theories of ideology. The first theory is what we call the essentialist theory of ideology. This theory says that distinct issues cluster together in ideological bundles because all political issues grow out of a single master issue, an essence. For example, John believes in abortion restrictions, tax cuts, and the war in Iraq because John is on the conservative side of the master issue, while Jane believes in abortion rights, tax hikes, and opposing the Iraq war because Jane is on the liberal side of the master issue. Being on one side of this issue leads to one set of positions, while being on the opposite side leads to the opposite set of positions. Some essentialists believe that this master issue exists in nature and is found in all political communities across time and space, while other essentialists believe that this master issue is a product of history and dominates only among modern pluralistic democracies. But in either case, essentialists believe that there are two sides to the left-right political spectrum because there are just two sides to this one master issue. This master issue is commonly understood to be change. The essentialist theory says that all left-wing positions promote change, while all right-wing positions try to arrest or reverse change. Issues as diverse as abortion, taxes, and affirmative action may seem unrelated, but that's only on the surface. Deep down, a person's stance on change, for or against, determines their stance on all of these other issues. Change is the one essential issue that binds together all the others and defines left and right across time and space. If the essentialist theory is correct, then the political spectrum is a useful and accurate way to model where people stand on that one essential issue. Extreme pro-change radicals will be at the far left. Extreme anti-change reactionaries will be at the far right. Pro-change liberals and progressives will be at the center left. Anti-change conservatives will be at the center right. And moderates who want some change, but not too much, will be in the middle. As an alternative to this essentialist theory of ideology, we propose the social theory of ideology. While the essentialist theory says that distinct political positions correlate because they are bound by a unifying essence, the social theory says that issues correlate because they are bound by a unifying tribe. According to the essentialist theory, people start with an essential principle, use that principle to think themselves to hundreds of distinct political positions, and then join the tribe that just happens to agree with them on all of those positions. The social theory says this is backward. People first anchor into an ideological tribe because of family, peers, or a single issue, adopt the positions of the tribe as a matter of socialization, and only then invent a story that ties all of those positions together. Ideologies, in other words, are reverse engineered to fit tribal actions and attachments. They are post hoc constructions designed to justify what we've just done or to support the groups we belong to. According to the social theory, we do not need an essence to explain why conservatives support both lower taxes and abortion restrictions. For the same reason, we do not need an essence to explain why San Francisco 49ers fans supported both Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. In each case, the support is explained by social group attachments. The essentialist theory says the political spectrum describes a reality of binary principles, but the social theory says the political spectrum creates a reality of binary tribes. Tribalism, without an underlying philosophy, has been strong enough to sustain nationalism for centuries, and tribalism, without an underlying philosophy, is strong enough to sustain ideological identities today. Testing the essentialist theory. Since theories are validated or falsified through testing, let's look at the predictions that each theory makes. The essentialist theory predicts that since core principles define the political spectrum, we should find people holding a consistent set of left or right positions independent of socialization. For example, if both wealth redistribution and abortion rights share a left-wing essence, we should find that these issues naturally correlate across time, space, and social conditioning. In fact, we find the opposite. Political psychologists have shown that people do not hold political views that fit current ideological molds until after they are socialized into the left-right way of thinking. The less tribal and the more ignorant of the political spectrum someone is, the less their views will align with the regnant ideological configurations. Let's take a moment to consider the implications of these findings. Since there is no correlation between belief in abortion rights and redistribution of wealth except among the segment of the population that has been most socialized into the left-right way of thinking, then this means the correlation is explained entirely by social conformism. Research by Donald Kinder and Nathan Kalmo has shown that, contra the predictions of the essentialist theory, people first anchor into an ideological tribe because of family, peers, or a single issue they feel strongly about, and only then adopt the full range of beliefs associated with that tribe. Ideological identification, in other words, is the cause, not the effect, of a person's political views. In general, tribal identity comes first, and beliefs come second. The religious right provides a great example of belief following tribe. According to political scientists Eric Gould and Esteban Clor, voting for a given political party in 1996 due to the individual's initial views on abortion in 1982 has a substantial effect on a person's political, social, and economic attitudes in 1997. As individuals realigned their party affiliation in accordance with their initial abortion views, their other political views followed suit. Millions of religious Americans had no ideological identity until abortion became a political issue in the 1970s. At that point, they anchored into the right-wing tribe and adopted its other positions, for example, supply-side economics, as a matter of social conformity. These members of the religious right have been among the most reliable supporters of the conservative tribe ever since. Anchoring and conformism, not essence, explain why most people hold views that fit left-right molds, and the predictions of the essentialist theory are not borne out in the data. Testing the social theory. The social theory, by contrast, predicts that since the positions associated with left and right are not natural but social, we should expect to see those on the left and right changing their political views depending on what their team is doing. Political beliefs, it predicts, will be contingent on social cues. This is exactly what we find. Political scientists Michael Barber and Jeremy Pope showed that conservatives would strongly agree with a policy, such as raising the minimum wage, when told that Donald Trump supported it, but would strongly disagree with that same policy when told that Trump opposed it. There was no commitment to an essential principle, such as limited government or free markets, underlying their policy preferences, but only tribal solidarity. Psychologist G.L. Cohen conducted a similar study in which he had students read of a generous welfare proposal, but told some that it was endorsed by the Democratic Party and others that it was endorsed by the Republican Party. As we would expect under the social theory, he found that for both liberal and conservative participants, the effect of reference group information overrode that of policy content. If their party endorsed it, liberals supported even a harsh welfare program, and conservatives supported even a lavish one. Political scientist Liliana Mason found that right-wing ideology strongly predicts support for Donald Trump, but not support for particular political issues. In other words, ideological measures tell us who people support, tribe, but not what they support, principles. Similarly, Gabriel Lenz showed that committed ideologues are far more likely to change their positions to fit the politicians for whom they vote than they are to change their vote to politicians who fit their positions. In general, the game is follow the tribe, as the social theory says, not follow the principles, as the essentialist theory says. Not only do ideologues change their views to conform to tribal leadership, but they also change to conform to tribal peers. A team of psychologists divided volunteers into different experimental worlds and had early movers in the different worlds take different positions on a variety of political issues. Against all essentialist predictions, those of the same ideological identity took opposite positions in the different worlds, depending upon what the early movers in their group were doing. These opinion cascades generated unpredictable political alignments in which the advocates on an issue might have instead been the opposition, but for the luck of the draw in the positions taken by early movers. Liberals and conservatives were unpredictable in how they would change their opinions, what principles they would follow, but highly predictable in who they would change their opinions to follow, peers of the same ideological label. Social influence causes substantively unrelated issues to align, the authors of the study concluded, and this, not an invisible essence, explains the correlation we find between left-wing and right-wing views on fiscal, social, and foreign policies. Just as the social theory predicts, most people first choose whom to identify with, tribe, and only then choose what to identify with, policy. In the words of psychologist Dan Cahan, they endorse whichever position reinforces their connection to others with whom they share important ties. Far from having a coherent, well-thought-out ideology based on essential principles, most ideologues of left and right cannot even provide a definition of their ideology. They strongly embrace a left or right-wing identity, but what that means in terms of principle is a mystery to them. Ideological self-categorization taps not what the respondent thinks about various issues, but rather the ideological label he or she finds most suitable. Ideology is a social, not a philosophical phenomenon. According to psychologists Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner, our judgments about risks, does gun control make us safer or put us in danger, are driven less by a careful weighing of evidence than by our identities, which is why people's views on gun control often correlate with their views on climate change, even though the two issues have no logical connection to each other. Psychologic trumps logic. Some might assume that this position switching based on social cues only happens among the uncommitted, the weak ideologues on the margins. But the experiments show that the more committed someone is to their ideology, the more likely they are to change their positions. The stronger one's ideological commitment, the more one's views are contingent upon social factors. If ideologues were principled rather than tribal, we would see the most committed ideologues holding most strongly to their principles in spite of social pressure. In fact, we see the opposite. As the social theory predicts, being more ideological for most people means being more tribal, not more principled, and extreme left or right wing does not mean a strong commitment to some essential left or right wing ideal, but means a strong commitment to following the left or right wing tribe. Although there are sticky ideologues who are less likely to change their views with priming, see Chapter 4, This is because they are loyal to a previous iteration of an ideology rather than an ideological essence. Those willing to change parties or ideological groups as left and right evolve are the exceptions to the rule. Humans do not naturally fit molds of left and right, as the essentialist theory says, but they do conform to them, as the social theory says. The essentialist theory and storytelling. While this evidence is devastating to the essentialist theory of ideology, many of its advocates nevertheless try to save it from falsification through ex post storytelling. Here is one example of a typical essentialist story. Since opposition to change is the essence of the right, those on the right naturally favor free markets and tax cuts because they want to preserve the laissez-faire traditions of American capitalism. They oppose abortion because they want to preserve Christian pro-life values. They favored the Iraq War because they wanted to preserve the tradition of American exceptionalism and military strength. They oppose free trade because they want to preserve American manufacturing. They oppose immigration because they want to preserve America's current ethnic composition. This story sounds plausible enough until we realize that we can, through the same method of creative storytelling, also make opposition to change the essence of the left. Consider this story. Since opposition to change is the essence of the left, those on the left naturally want to conserve the environment and the American welfare state. They favor government anti-poverty programs because they want to conserve the traditional Christian value of helping the poor. They favor abortion rights because they want to conserve a woman's right to choose. Those on the left oppose radical attempts to change the world using military force and want more immigration because they believe in conserving the American tradition of welcoming the tired, poor, huddled masses to the country. Leftists believe in conserving long-standing American institutions such as Social Security, teachers' unions, and the FDA, while those on the right want to change or abolish them. The second story is less familiar, but no less plausible than the first, and together they make it clear that storytelling can make opposition to change the essence of either the right or the left. Indeed, creative storytelling can make any essence fit any set of political positions. For example, here is a set of randomly selected political positions: pro-life, high tax, tough on crime, pro-gay marriage, anti-redistribution of wealth. Now here's a story that shows how the randomly selected essence of assertiveness unites all these positions. Assertive people are not afraid to stand up for the rights of others, including homosexuals and the unborn, and that's why they are pro-life and in favor of gay marriage. Assertive people have no problem asserting themselves into other people's lives, and therefore favor the high taxation that others might consider intrusive. Assertive people are not afraid to stand up against criminals, and are therefore in favor of tough laws and harsh sentencing. Assertive people are more likely to be self-reliant, and therefore less willing to favor redistribution programs that cause people to rely on government. You've never heard this story before. We just made it up. But it is as valid as any of the other stories you've heard that uphold the essentialist theory of ideology. Just as storytellers come up with creative ways to unify everything conservatives believe using the opposition to change essence, so we can come up with a creative way to unify these random positions using the assertiveness essence. We challenge the listener to do the same. Take a random set of political positions and a random characteristic, and then make up a story showing how the characteristic unifies all those random positions. It is an entertaining exercise and shows the worthlessness of storytelling as a method for validating ideological essentialism or any other theory. When we mistake such stories for evidence, we are falling victim to the narrative fallacy, and it is largely the narrative fallacy that keeps people believing in the essentialist theory. Essentialist stories also get stuck in self-contradiction. For example, if right-wing essentially means opposition to change, then we would expect right-wing extremist Adolf Hitler to have been extremely against change. In reality, Hitler was committed to radically transforming the world through military conquest. Similarly, it is hard to think of a system more productive of change than capitalism. It is, in the words of historian Joyce Appleby, a force of relentless revolution. And yet we often call advocates of capitalism right-wing. To complicate matters further, Hitler, like his counterparts in militarist Japan, was opposed to capitalism. He was, after all, the leader of the National Socialist Party. So it is either the case that Hitler was left-wing advocates of capitalism are left-wing, or there is no change essence behind.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?